do a recap of marketing strategy, and I'm gonna mostly discuss broad strategy concepts and how they apply to marketing in particular. And I'm gonna give you a few tools that you can actually use whenever you are doing case analysis and you're actually asked to create a strategy for a firm. Okay, so first let's start with the definition. What is strategy? Strategy, I think everybody has a sense for it. It's basically a set of plans that we set forth to try to achieve a certain goal, right? And so what we need to start with is what the goal is, right? So in the case of a business, most businesses, what they are trying to do is they're trying to satisfy clients so they can actually achieve a basic, at least, level of profitability, right? So ultimately, what you're trying to do is satisfy customers so that you can obtain some profits. So profits are going to be, in many ways, one of the key goals that we're going to be setting up for the business. Okay. And what we're going to try to do in our strategy is determine what are the optimal set of actions so that we can be essentially competitive in the marketplace doing so. Okay. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to obtain essentially long-term survivability of the firm, which is going to mean achieving profitability in the long term. And the way we do that is by becoming in some way different than our competition, that it's not easy to copy. And we call that a sustainable competitive advantage, something that hopefully will keep us in business in the long term. Now, if you're looking at profitability as probably your primary goal, by the way, sales and profitability obviously are different. You can always achieve higher sales at the cost of profitability by cutting price. Okay, so profits are harder to achieve than sales. Okay, so when we're talking about profitability, is usually a preferable metric, especially if you're thinking about the long term. Okay, because you can give up your profits to just get sales. Okay, and that's probably not a good strategy in the long term. You can maybe do it in the short term. Now, when we're talking about profitability, there are essentially two aspects, two big forces that are going to determine how profitable you're going to be, okay, as a company. Okay, number one, it's going to be the attractiveness on the industry in which you operate. Okay, so regardless of how good you're doing within your industry, the fact that you are in that particular industry is going to determine to some degree how successful and especially how profitable you are. Okay. So for example, last year, 2020, if you happen to be in the market making personal protective equipment, right, and that's an industry that you've been in the past, suddenly, with probably no actions on your own, you became a lot more profitable than you were in 2019. And the reason why is because the industry overall became a lot more attractive. The demand for personal protective equipment, things like N95 masks, for example, skyrocketed, right? Everybody now is worried about COVID, and because of that, the demand for this equipment went up. So without you as a company doing anything different, the industry attractiveness increased dramatically, right? So your profits are going to go up, not because you're doing things better, just because you got lucky or unlucky, I don't know, in this case with COVID, right? Good. So some industries are inherently more attractive than others. We'll talk about factors that determine this, okay, later. The second aspect that it's important determining how profitable you are is essentially what is your position as a company within the industry. Meaning, how good are you doing within the industry in terms of the strategy that you have selected. Okay, so how are your products? Okay, how are you pricing your products? How are you distributing your products? Right, and that's going to determine how profitable you are also, right? Not only what industry you are. So even within the same industry, if you take the car manufacturing industry, for example, that suffered a decrease in demand last year, right? Why? Because COVID, right? People bought less cars for a whole host of reasons, okay? Even within that industry, there are firms that have done particularly well in 2020. For example, Tesla, right? So you could be growing substantively even though the industry overall has shrunk. And so even though the industry might not be as attractive as it used to be, because of your own actions, your firm position has improved within the industry, and that gives you more profits. These two forces are different, and you need to understand which one is at play, because sometimes you will see firms that are struggling in terms of profitability, but it's not because their strategy is flawed, it's because the industry is not attractive. So it's important to really understand what is really happening in the situation that you're trying to analyze or understand. Now, let's discuss what are the key 5 forces that are going to determine what industries are profitable. And this is work that comes from Michael Porter. It's old but very solid. Michael Porter is an economist. And anyway, let's go through the 5 forces. So the first and probably most obvious determinant of profitability is the degree of competition. Okay, so what's going to happen in an industry when there is no competition, meaning there is just one firm and hence it's a monopoly, it's when you're going to observe the highest potential profits. Okay, so having a lot of firms competing in an industry is obviously going to be bad for your profitability, because it's going to lead you usually to have to lower your prices, and because of that you're going to observe that industries where there is a lot of competition tend to have low profits. Okay, so regardless of how good of a job you're doing with your products, distribution, etc., etc. What else? Also, industries where there are a lot of substitute products tend to be less profitable, right? So, for example, if you're talking about, I don't know, coming up with a vaccine for COVID, right? And there are not a lot of substitutes for that product. Okay, the reason why is because other than not being exposed to the disease, there is not a lot that you can do to just, treat it, at least so far. Maybe we can come up with something down the line, hopefully, right? So in a situation like that, the vaccine doesn't have a lot of substitute products. Okay, there are not other things that you can easily do to obtain the same benefits. And because of that, the prices for the vaccine probably will go or will be higher than will be otherwise. Okay, and in a situation like that, what you're going to observe is that overall in that industry, right, and firms tend to be more profitable because there are not a lot of substitutes. On the other hand, if you're comparing instead of a vaccine something like an over-the-counter analgesic, something that you use to relieve your pain of some of the symptoms from COVID, like for example ibuprofen or acetaminophen, and those are highly substitutable products. In fact, there are different molecules that you can use to achieve very similar results, and they are all in the marketplace. Things like aspirin, which I think is salicylic acid. Anyway, and there is a whole host of different products that you can substitute from. In fact, if you go to a doctor of dance, they'll tell you take this or that, right? They will not necessarily prescribe you ibuprofen versus acetaminophen. Okay, so when there are substitutes, okay, like in the case that I'm discussing of over-the-counter analgesics, what's going to happen is the profitability of the industry is going to be lower. Okay, good. What else? Then we have bargaining power of customers, right? So if you're in an industry where there are many customers, and because of that, each one are going to make small purchases, and that industry is going to be more profitable than if you are in an industry when there are only 1 or 2 large customers, because then they are going to exert a lot of pressure on price. Okay, so for example, if we talk about military equipment, right, the U.S. government, the U.S. military, right, it's going to be one of the largest, if not the largest customer for many firms that make military equipment in the U.S., right? So like General Dynamics, for example, right? And so in a situation like that, when you have only 1 or maybe 2 customers, what's going to happen is you're going to tend to have lower profits, because those customers are going to be able to extract lower prices from you, because if you don't buy, they don't buy your products, then you don't have other customers to go to. Okay, I think that's simple. Good. What else determines your profitability? Your suppliers, right? Very similarly, how large are your suppliers and how easy is for you to switch from one supplier to another. If it's a simple matter, then you're going to be able to keep the price for those supplies that you're buying from your suppliers low, and it's going to enable you to have more profits. On the other hand, if there are only one or two suppliers that can provide a certain product, like for example, if you're talking about lithium-ion batteries for electric cars, Panasonic, for example, is one of the main suppliers worldwide. For, if I'm not mistaken, about 10 years, Tesla had an exclusive contract with Panasonic because it was hard for Tesla to find batteries from any other supplier that were for the right specs and the right prices, right? So in a situation like that, when you only have one or maybe potentially two suppliers, like maybe other than Panasonic, maybe LG, right? And then it's going to be harder to be profitable. By the way, not on that, Tesla eventually has learned how to make their own batteries and now probably are a little bit more profitable because they make them in-house and they don't need to be basically tied to that agreement with Panasonic. Okay, good. And finally, the potential of new firms entering in the competition. So what happens when you have a monopoly, but it's not a legal monopoly? Legal monopoly is when the government basically dictates that no other firm can operate in that space. Okay, if that happens, then the threat of potential entrants is essentially zero, because unless you change the laws, which is hard to do, there is not going to be new entrants in the industry. If that happens, your profitability is going to be a lot higher. On the other hand, if you are the first company in the market, and because of that, you are a de facto monopoly because nobody else has entered yet, nobody is offering that product other than you, then the fact that other firms could enter and operate in that space, it's going to push you to keep your prices relatively low, because if you keep them really high and you start making a lot of money, a lot of other companies are going to see that and they're going to jump in. So the threat of potential entrants is also going to make your industry essentially less attractive and tend to have lower profits overall, regardless of how good of a job you do as a firm. Okay. Now, then where does the role of the firm come in? If it's all about the industry, well, it's not all about the industry. Like I said before, it's a balance, right? There are two forces in here, right? And so from the firm perspective, doing a good job is also going to give you a better position in the industry. And even if the industry is not as attractive, you might still be able to be highly profitable, okay? Now, how are you going to set your strategic view when it comes down to the firm? Well, there are different views on this, but one that I think it's reasonable, at least explaining the big picture role of strategy, is the resource view of the firm. And what that essentially says is that the positional advantage that a firm accrues in an industry is going to be a function of two things. Okay, one is the kind of resources that the firm has access to, right? This could be things like capital, right? Or it could be natural resources, right? So for example, if you're trying to set up a resort, right? Having access to prime real estate, maybe in a location where the weather's really nice, right? It's a hard to copy resource, right? That you might actually be able to acquire. I don't know, okay? And then you also have capabilities, right? So capabilities are skills that the firm has developed over time that may be valuable because they are difficult to either copy or acquire, right? So we were talking about Tesla before, and Tesla, for example, the last couple of years has been acquiring small artificial intelligence firms. They have done at least 2 acquisitions, right? And these are small boutique firms. And the reason why they are doing this is because they are trying to launch and improve, I guess, the capabilities of their self-driving car, right? So they have a suite of sensors and software that enables the car, at least theoretically, to drive on its own without any input from the driver. And even though at this point it's still in beta version and not approved by the government to be fully autonomous, it can already drive to some degree. So they've been working really hard on improving those capabilities, and those are capabilities that are actually hard to get. Most people don't know what it's entail in, for example, writing a neural network algorithm that enables you to basically translate inputs from a camera into a computer and basically be able to translate that so that the car can recognize when you are on the road and when you're veering off-road, right? So how do you acquire these capabilities? Sometimes you need to just hire the people, right? Either from the competition, or like in this case, you just buy the firm outright, right? So if there is a firm that has 10, 15 people that are basically writing software for artificial intelligence, which is essentially the capability they're trying to build in a situation like this, what do? To get those capabilities, you may be forced to just acquire the firm overall, okay? And it's the interplay between these resources and the capabilities that is going to basically determine what is your position within the industry, okay? So, by the way, when I'm saying resources here, things like brands, which are probably the quintessential marketing resource, is also a resource, right? So it's all this conglomerate of resources and capabilities that basically enable you to become profitable within the industry by having an advantage over your competition, okay? And that's where we're going to get the value from, okay? Now, one tool that has been used in the past to see how well a firm is going to do within an industry is the value chain, okay? So I'm going to briefly talk about it so that you guys are aware of. It's mentioned a lot. It may be mentioned in one of the cases, and just in general, it's good for you to know. The idea behind this is also comes from economics, and it's that essentially a firm's productivity is going to be a function of what kind of activities are happening within the firm, okay? So what we're going to do is, if we can break down what all the activities that are conducted within the firm are, and we analyze them, we can have a good idea about whether A, a firm is going to be profitable, and B, whether it's going to be able to compete well with other firms in the industry, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to basically break down all activities happening within the firm, okay? And I'm going to show you in graphical form. You have them here in a list. Let's look at the graphic that kind of captures all this information. So here you have a typical diagram that tries to describe what the value firm is. Sorry, the value chain, okay? So as you can see over here, it basically displays all the activities that happen within the firm. And what it's going to do is it's going to break it down between two types of activities. The ones at the bottom here, I don't know if this yellow you can see very well. Let me try blue. And these activities over here, right? And these are the primary activities, okay, which are basically logistics, inbound logistics, operations. Operations is putting together the product or delivering the service, okay. Outbound logistics, this is basically taking that product or service to the final client, okay. And sales and marketing, okay. And customer support or service, okay. These are what are considered, according to the value chain framework, the primary activities of the firm. And then you have the support activities. Now, the fact that these are support activities doesn't mean that they are unimportant, but usually these are considered the core activities of the firm, the ones over here. So support activities sometimes might be able to, for example, be outsourced, right? So what are those support activities? Things like human resources, technology, right? Procurement. Procurement is basically acquisition of primary materials that you actually need for building your product, okay? Now, everything here is important, and what we're going to be doing is try to analyze where the advantages are for a firm. Is it because they have a phenomenal take on how to put together products? Maybe they can do that in a very efficient and inexpensive way. Or is it because their logistical capabilities are very good? Who has very good logistical capabilities nowadays? Amazon. Amazon, a company that has done extremely well, obviously, over the last few years, has a huge impact and emphasis on logistics. The reason why is because being an online merchant, their ex-CEO, I should say, as of today, Bezos has stepped down as the CEO of Amazon. So very clearly, at least 10, 15 years ago, that if he didn't do something about getting the products really quickly to the customer, he was not going to be able to compete with brick and mortar stores. The reason why is because obviously when you buy something online, one of the big drawbacks of it is that you're going to have to wait until the product arrives to you. So Amazon put a huge emphasis in getting those products, the outbound logistics aspect, as quickly as possible. They pushed FedEx and UPS so hard that eventually broke the contract because they were not happy with what the terms and conditions of the deliveries were, and because the firms probably could not push either the cost any lower and or the speed at which those products were delivered. And because of that, they created their own logistical and distribution system. So I'm sure you've seen those prime vans around delivering Amazon products on Sundays, which is something that FedEx will not agree to. Right? Good. So it depends on what aspect you are excelling at. You're going to see what your position is within the industry. Also, by analyzing the different cost structures in each of these different activities, is going to give you a good idea of how competitive a firm is going to be from a cost perspective. Now, what do you have here as an outcome of this? You're going to have sales and cost, which is going to give you your margin. Okay, margin in general is defined as, so margin, I'm going to write it here, right? Although I don't write very well with the mouse, I'm sorry. It's going to be equal to your price, we'll see this in another presentation, minus your variable cost. Okay, this is going to be your margin. Okay, so if you understand what your variable cost is, and you can do that by looking at all these activities, because this is where the cost comes from, right? And you can see what is the price that the company is charging, which is also going to be a function of some of these activities, right? Then you can tell me how profitable the company is going to be. Okay, margin is the basic building block of profitability. Okay, good. Now, let me give you an example of how you can achieve a sustainable competitive advantage with a firm that you probably know, right? Southwest. Now, Southwest is a company that has taken an industry that traditionally has not innovated a lot, and it has turned it inside out, right? Or upside down, maybe it's better description of what happened. And what they did is they decided that they were gonna push the idea of low fares, and they were gonna strip all the offering of all the aspects that were not considered essential by the clients. So let's see how that will look like from a decision standpoint. Okay. So what they did, what Southwest did, is they changed a lot of the practices that were considered necessary within the industry. Okay. One of the key changes that they made that enable them to offer those low prices, it's to fly point to point. Okay. This is something that most companies don't actually do. What they use is they use a hub and spokes model, right, where they have a central hub, like for example for United Airlines, Chicago O'Hare is one of their central hubs. Okay, and what they do is they route all the flights or many of the flights there and from there. So what you're going to have to do is, if you want to fly from one side of the country to another, oftentimes you need to stop at Chicago O'Hare because that's the way the flights are routed. Okay. Whereas point-to-point flight, you just fly from where you want to go to where you want to go. There is no central hub per se. Okay. This obviously costs them in things like operating costs, right? Because of fuel, etc., etc. You don't need to take two flights. You are just selling one flight. There are other downsides of point-to-point, but that's one of the main advantages. What else did they do? They cut a bunch of amenities, right? So no seat assignment, no meals, which now has spread to the whole industry, but this was not typical when Southwest started this practice, right? And they sell the tickets directly on their website. Again, This is now industry-wide adopted, but it was not the case when Southwest started, right? And they only have one type of airplane, right? They only fly Boeing 737s, okay? And that enables them to basically have the same training for all the pilots and the same training for all the mechanics, right? And on and on and on. So you can see are all the activities that they have actually undertaken to really achieve this unique position in the industry. Now, I want you guys to realize that any single of these things per se might be something that other companies can copy, although copying things like point to point, it's really difficult because you have built already your infrastructure around this, okay? But copying all of these things in the industry is very hard for any of the existing companies. So this is a position that is, at least by outsiders like me, considered fairly sustainable in the long term because it's actually hard to copy and customers seems to be valuing the offering that they have created. Good. Now, when we're talking about strategy in general, we're going to talk about two basic strategies. And again, this comes from Michael Porter again. Okay. Okay. So the first one is you're going to try to be as cheap as you can be. Okay. So essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to cut your cost maximally so that you can offer a no frills option that is going to enable you, because your costs are so low, to sell the product at a low price and still maintain profit. Okay. You can always sell a loss, but obviously in the long term, that's not a productive strategy. Okay. Good. That's one option. What is the other option? Let me move through that. Second option is differentiation. What is differentiation? Is to make your product different in some way that is going to enable customers to see the value that you're adding, and because of that, either prefer your product over other options or enable you to charge a higher price. Now notice these two strategies are very different. Cost leadership is simple but hard to do. Differentiation, and it's simple in the sense that, by the way, it's only one thing you need to focus on. Differentiation, you can differentiate yourself in any aspect that your customer thinks is valuable. Okay, you can build brands, you can make the product more luxurious, higher quality, more reliable, and better performing product, whatever it is, they are all feasible differentiation strategies. Now notice these two are not compatible. You cannot do both. If you try to do both, somebody else will focus on one of them and they will win. The reason why is because anything that enables you to differentiate yourself is going to cost money. So you can always cut it off and be cheaper. Okay? These two things cannot happen simultaneously. So if you get stuck in the middle, you lose. Okay? So the big idea in your strategy is pick a street and basically execute and make sure that all your ideas are aligned around that very clear idea, right? Whether you're trying to be the cheapest or you're trying to be leader in some sort of differentiation aspect or vector. It doesn't matter which one, but pick one and run with it. Okay, good. Now, how does strategy look at the organizational level if you're looking at the whole company? Okay, so the big picture, you have corporate strategy, then you're gonna basically define the vision of the company. So what are we trying to do as a company? Make profits and know what else, right? Right. Then after that, you're gonna have different business units. Okay. So typical example of this will be General Electric, right? It's a really large corporation that has different business units that operate essentially as different businesses that are, under overarching vision, but they operate pretty independently. They have their own P&L, profit and loss statement. Okay, so what kind of business units are under General Electric? For example, they have healthcare, where all the imaging products are. So if you need to get an MRI, for example, probably the machine that will be doing your MRI will be manufactured by General Electric, right? They have their energy business where they build different solutions like turbines, for example, that can create electricity. They also make nuclear reactors, both for military and for the civilian applications, right? What else do they have? They also have their maybe more visible aspect for us consumers, which is the appliance business unit, right? They make fridges, they make dishwashers, they make toasters, right? You can buy them in different places. So each of these business units is going to somewhat independently set their strategy, right? So they're going to have their own goals that are going to have to fall under the overarching goal of corporate, right? What is they are trying to do, big picture. And then we're going to have functional strategy. This is where marketing strategy lies, right? So within a business unit, you're going to have different functions. So you're going to have finance, you're going to have maybe R&D, you're going to have operations or manufacturing, and here it's going to live marketing strategy, right? Which is going to have to develop a strategy that is consistent with the goals of the business unit and the vision from corporate, okay? So we're going to take that as input, and then we're going to try to come up with the best set of actions to achieve the goals that we have set forth, okay? So I'm going to walk you through that process right now. Now, for us to understand how a strategy is going to work, let me give you a crash course 101 marketing process, right? You should have seen this already in your intro class, but to put strategy in context, let's make sure that, because we're going to be talking about marketing strategy, we understand how the marketing process works. So what you're going to do as a marketer is first start by gathering information from the environment, right, from around you, to see where you are. So for you to understand what to do, first you need to know where you are. Okay, so what you're going to do first is scan the environment. Okay, how do you do that? You try to understand your customers. You define who your competition is and what they are up to. I'm sorry, wrong box. Here are your competitors. You look inside of your company and see what kind of capabilities and resources do you have at your disposal, right? We were talking about the resource-based view of the firm, right? So it fits right here. What else? We're going to look at context. What's going on around us? How is the economy? Is the economy doing well? Is it not, right? How is COVID doing, right? Good. And who else? Who else do we have in our site that is going to enable us to maybe acquire some of those capabilities that we don't have? Can we lean on our suppliers to maybe do some of the work that internally we don't have the know-how to do, right? For example, distributors, etc. Okay. And after we understand what the situation is, and I'm going to give you the tools to do this as we go, we're going to use exactly this diagram right here, right? This is a shorter version of what I'm going to call the 5 C's. Then what we're going to do is we're going to set our big picture strategy for marketing, okay? And that's going to be done right here. This is your segmentation, targeting, and strategy, and positioning. Here, it's where the big picture strategy lies in the marketing process, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take information from here about our customers, and based on that, we're going to create a segmentation, right? This is grouping our customers in homogeneous groups that enables us to basically target them as a group instead of as individuals. Why? Because if we try to treat them as individuals, sometimes we have a hard time serving them individually. If we can do that, great. But if capability-wise you cannot customize the product endlessly, maybe you need to group them into a segment, right? And hopefully you know how to do that. If you don't, I'll maybe talk a little bit more about this, right? Then what do you do with those segments? You decide which one to target. What is going to be your ideal customer, right? Who are you going to be trying to chase after, right? And which segment is it going to be? Okay. Again, if you can target individual customers? Be my guest. But oftentimes, from a, for example, communication strategy, it's hard to target individual customers, but you can actually target groups. Okay, that's why we usually do target market selection, right? Okay. So we focus our attention into one or a couple of segments, right, that we think are ideal for our firm to serve, right, to make happy. And then finally, what we're going to do is, for that target segment, how do we want to be perceived? What is our positioning going to be, right? Good. This is in the minds of the customer, right? And then after we have the big picture strategy, this kind of sets our direction. Then what we can do is we can determine how the product should be like. When I say product, I'm talking about a combination of products and services, whatever it is that you have going on, right? What distribution channels are you going to use? Okay. How are you going to communicate with your customer, right? What kind of promotional mix are you going to be using? Okay. How are you going to price your product? Okay. These are tactics. Okay. This big aspect here. First, we have big picture strategy. That's segmentation, targeting, and position. Then we have tactics. This is how we implement that strategy. How do we achieve that positioning? By having the right product that conveys the right image that we're trying to achieve in our positioning, by using the right distribution channel that is consistent with our positioning statement, by communicating appropriately with our customers, and by setting a price that is also aligned with our positioning strategy. These things need to work together. That's the essence of strategy, right? Setting a direction and then making the elements work together. And then finally, if we've done a good job, we'll get new customers, that's acquisition, or we'll keep some of the ones we have, that's called retention. And from here, we'll get our profits. This is how marketing works as a process, okay? And as you can see, the role of strategy is going to be played, actually let me change colors. It's going to be played right here. It's between these two parts. First, big picture strategy, and then second, the tactics. I'm going to make those purple. Tactics over here. Okay, so these are the topics that we're going to be covering in class. Good. So how are we going to create a strategy? Okay, and we're going to create a marketing plan essentially, right? Big picture. That's what we mean. Whenever you hear a marketing plan, it's talking about the marketing strategy. Okay. First thing we're going to do, we're going to do a situational analysis. Where are we? Right? Those were the first few boxes that I covered in the previous slide. Okay. I'm going to talk to you about two potential tools you can use for this. One is, you probably know already, it's called SWOT analysis. The other one, it's going to be the 5 C's, which I'm going to describe. I already hinted at 4 of those 5. Okay. Okay. So after we have enough information, either by doing a SWOT analysis or using the 5C framework, what we're going to do is we're going to set our strategy, okay? And to do that, we're going to start with the big picture strategy, right? Segmentation, targeting, and positioning, okay? And we're going to decide what are we trying to achieve with those segments, right? What is our goal? By the way, when I say goal, it needs to be concrete, right? So it's not, oh, we want to do better. No, you're going to have to say, I want to increase profit by 10% over a 2-year period, right? It needs to be concrete and it needs to be time bound, okay? Otherwise the goals are just wishes. So how are you going to get there, right? And to achieve that goal within that segment, what you're going to do is you're going to write down the tactics. What are the concrete actions that we're going to undertake to achieve that goal, okay? Good. And then once that you have that program, what you're going to do is you're going to implement it. How is it going to happen? What are the deadlines that we need to hit, right? And how are we going to measure whether we are on track or not, okay? And then finally, we're going to check whether we are achieving our goals or not, the control phase, right? This is what we were supposed to be achieving, 10% growth rate. This is our growth rate. As we said, we were going to be measuring it. Compare the two, and if there is a discrepancy, you start the process all over again, okay? Corrective actions, okay. Now, if you follow that three-step procedure, the first thing you need to do is understand what's going on, right? One way to do that, whenever you're looking at a case, is going to be doing a SWOT analysis. You probably have seen this in the past. I be very honest with you, I'm not the biggest fan of SWOT analysis, but you can use it, right? So the idea is you put all the facts from the case as either being internal or external. So is it something that is happening that is under the control of the firm? If so, it's internal. If it is outside of the control of the firm, it's external. Like, for example, the economic conditions are something that is going to be external, and something that will be internal will be whether you're going to hire a new executive for a position, for example. Right? Okay. So, and then what you're going to do is you're going to divide the aspects that are internal as either strengths, something that it's done exceptionally well by the company, or a weakness, something that we are below what will be industry average, right? And then what you're going to do is at the external aspects, you're either going to call them opportunities, if they are something that are going to overall help our position in the industry, or threats, if they are something that could actually put our position in the industry in danger. And then what you're going to do is you're going to basically write down these facts, and you're going to look at this SWOT analysis and decide, what are your key threats, what are your key opportunities, and what are the things that we have going for us in terms of strengths or weaknesses. Okay, this is one way of organizing the information. Good. Now, the other way of organizing that information is going to be described later. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into a separate presentation, because otherwise this is going to get too long. Okay, and that's going to be the 5 C's model. So I will post a presentation on that shortly. Okay, good. Now, after you have that information, what you're going to do is you're going to decide basically what your strategy is going to be for that market, right? And the key aspects of strategy, like I was walking you through before, are going to be my segmentation. So you're going to have to decide which kind of customers are you going to be trying to be targeting, right? Which ones are more attractive for us, either because they buy more of the product, or because what they are interested in aligns better with the strengths that we have as a firm. Maybe we have a brand that already has a certain positioning in the marketplace, and it's consistent with what this particular segment is interested in, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to try to create a positioning strategy around this target segment, right? And that's essentially how you want this group of customers to perceive your company. Now, realize that people are smart, and if you tell them that your product is luxurious, but they buy the product and it doesn't feel luxurious at all, and it doesn't matter what you say, it matters what you do. So when I'm talking about positioning, this is a combination of messaging and also actions, right? So positioning is not just, smoke and mirrors, okay? Positioning is making sure that the experience that the customer has with your product and brand is consistent with what you're trying that positioning to be, okay? And that might actually, many times, mean that you need to change the product, not just the messaging aspects, okay? Good. And then what you're going to do with that positioning is you're going to basically translate it into your 4 Ps, which are your tactics, right? If I'm a luxurious brand, my price probably should be high in the marketplace, right? If somebody tells you that the product is very luxurious, but it's also really cheap, you as a customer know that that doesn't actually fly, right? So one of the two needs to be wrong. Either the price is wrong or the luxury aspect is wrong, right? So if you can't have both, whatever is less tangible is going to go and be dismissed by the customer, right? So because the price is tangible, they know right away, they're going to assume that maybe you're not as luxurious as you claim to be, right? So you need to be consistent, right? Same thing with the product, right? If you say that you're the ultimate driving machine, when I get in the car, that's for BMW tagline, by the way, And then I need to feel like the car handles really well, accelerates well, because it's supposed to be a high performance vehicle, right? And if I just drove another car and it feels like it's actually faster, I just drove a Tesla and it accelerates a lot faster than your car, maybe I'm going to start wondering whether that statement you're making is correct or not. Okay. Also, where are you selling your product? Right? Distribution matters a lot, right? So it needs to be consistent. If the dealership for the car is not very nice and the sales tactics are not exactly inviting, maybe even though your car might be nice, I might not want to buy it, right? This is a problem, for example, that Hyundai was facing, and now they're trying to start a new brand, Genesis, and their own their own dealership network, because the whole experience was not very consistent. We can talk about that at a later time, but everything needs to be consistent, and your messaging as well. Okay. Good. So consistency, consistency, consistency. The theme needs to be running through. What theme? Your positioning. Where does your positioning come in? From your target market. And where is your target market coming from? Your segments. Okay? Good. So there is a chain, goes from one to the other, and everything is telling you the same story, hopefully. We've already talked about what your target market is, right? It's essentially the group of customers that you are most interested in, because either they are most attractive and or your capabilities and resources fit them the best to be able to provide that value that it's going to make sure that they stay around and that you can build a relationship with. Now, when I'm talking about differentiating your products and creating a positioning, if you can do this with water, okay, and you can see here two companies that have very distinctive positioning, right? One is around working out and exercising and being healthy. The other one is about maybe a nice dinner, so more luxurious experience, right? Both of them are water. Yeah, this one has some bubbles on it, but at the end of the day, the basic product is very similar, but the position is totally different, right? So you need to understand the whole positioning exercise can be done for any product. And what you need to do is you need to make sure that the product has the right emphasis, that the messaging has the right emphasis, etc., etc. Notice, for example, right, the bottles. One is made out of plastic, the other one is made out of what? Glass, right? Why? Glass is heavy. Products that are heavier, we tend to think that they are better put together and they give us a sense of quality that plastic does not, for the most part, do, right? So it's the overarching design that translate this positioning to the customer. Here you have another example. I was talking about Hyundai, right, and Genesis. So here you have three cars that are built by the Hyundai group, okay, and three cars that basically have the same mechanical underpinnings, so it's the same architecture, but they are targeting different customers, right? This is for, let's say, more cost-conscious families, right? The Kia Telluride, if I remember correctly. Okay. And here you have the car geared towards everyday luxury families, and the Hyundai Palisade, if I can pronounce that name right? And then finally, for a more luxurious experience, and maybe a little bit more sporty too, you have the Genesis GV80, right? They all have very similar mechanical underpinnings, but the whole experience, both at the dealership and the options that you have in the different cars and the way the cars look, is somewhat, I will say at least, different. Okay, achieving that differentiation and positioning.